let's give this a watch first, and then we'll see what we got. Fat Electrician: When Marines Took a Duck into Battle in World War II. Here we go.
Marine Corps story I've ever heard in my entire life, and there's absolutely no way that it's been embellished. Like a lot. Ladies and gentlemen, we've already talked about the Marine Corps' most famous animal hero, Sergeant Reckless, the horse that was adopted by the Marines during the Korean War that would go on to become the hero of Outpost Vegas and the first horse to ever partake in a Marine Corps amphibious landing. But before Sergeant Reckless, the Marine Corps had another hero from the animal kingdom that partook in multiple amphibious landings in the Pacific theater of World War II. Today we're talking about Sergeant Seawash, aka the Devil Duck. But first, a word from our sponsor. This video is brought to you by Delete Me. Delete Me is an online subscription service. It's a very straightforward, simple business. You give them money, they get rid of your...
Hey man, they might be a small animal.
Here's the deal. Somehow, some way, your
And some people might not look at them as all that threatening. But don't fuck with a duck, man. Don't fuck with a duck. Because they will fuck with you back. They will. And in basic training, they don't really teach you too much on how to deal with animals in combat. They teach you how to kill people. But with animals, not too much. And I can't even imagine what I would do in a situation if I was confronted with an animal. Like if the enemy threw an animal at me. Right?
In New Zealand, gearing up to go into combat against the Japanese in World War II. And like all great military stories, it totally happened. It begins in a bar with a bunch of Marines drinking. And as is tradition with the military drinking at a bar, there are conflicting reports as to what actually happened. According to the Marine Corps, the Marines went out to a local bar in New Zealand. They then started drinking with the locals, and they all had a great, very professional, cordial time where they all drank a very appropriate amount of alcohol,
I doubt
potentially
that.
even a Surgeon General recommended amount.
Lies. Lies.
And then none of the Marines went out and hooked up with any of the local women. And if they did,
Lies.
hypothetically, which they didn't, but if they did, it would have been strictly in the missionary position, and the Marines would have used protection. Now, while they were at the bar, there was also a raffle. And apparently, a bunch of the Marines bought these tickets for this raffle, and one of the Marines by the name of Sergeant Francis Fagan ended up winning the raffle. Now, the grand prize for this raffle at a bar in New Zealand was apparently a duck. And that's what the Marine Corps says happened. Now, according to the other sources, mostly the personal accounts of the Marines that were actually there and quite...
I think I believe this because out of all the things that Marines could quite possibly lie about, I don't really feel like they would lie about this. I really do feel like this actually took place and this was a true story. Because why lie about this, right? Why lie about the duck? Why lie about a duck in general? Out of all the things to lie about, out of all the things to embellish, yeah, no, this happened.
Frankly, common sense says that the Marines were at this local bar partying their faces off like they were about to go into the biggest armed conflict the world has ever seen, and while they were there, some of the Marines were playing poker with the locals, and the Marines apparently took all of their money, and they came back to the table, and they're like, all right, well, here's my prize duck, I'm gonna put that up as a wager, and the Marine Corps ended up winning that too, and that, again, was Sergeant Francis Fagan, aka Pappy. Now, personally, I'm going to go ahead and err on the side of the Marines got hammered at a bar and won a duck in a poker game, and the chain of command didn't want to get in trouble for associating the Marine Corps with gambling, so they just made up some weird shit, like apparently bars in New Zealand raffle off ducks, but you can go ahead and decide to believe whatever you want. Regardless, either way, Francis
I think it's cooler to believe that it was just gambling, really, and fuck that, man. At the end of the day, we're soldiers, and we're degenerates. We drink, we smoke, we gamble, we engage in dangerous behavior. Yeah, nah. Fuck all that raffling shit. Like,
Fagan, and by extension, the Marine Corps now has a duck. So what are the Marines going to do with a duck? Obviously, they take it under their wing.
No pun intended.
I'd like to apologize to the internet for making you a dad.
I mean, to be fair, that is true. I kind of turned her into a bodybuilder for like 18 months between the two kids.
Wow.
Interrupting my history time. Sorry about that. Anyways, the Marines pretty much immediately teach this duck how to drink beer, which I know what you're thinking. That's probably not very healthy for the duck, but to be fair, there are worse vices to have. I mean, he could get addicted to quack. I'm sorry. I'm done. Okay, I'm done with the dad jokes. That joke was foul.
If you don't know how to make...
I mean, technically, bro, They could have eaten the duck, so giving it alcohol isn't really the worst thing, in my opinion.
Anyways, they become drinking buddies with this duck. He becomes one of the Marines, and then time comes for them to all go off to war and actually engage with the Japanese. Sure enough, they take the duck with them. Fast forward, November 1943, the Battle of Tarawa. It's one of the bloodiest battles in Marine Corps history. Essentially, the Japanese have 4,000 soldiers dug in and heavily fortified on the Tarawa Atoll, and the Marines have to go in there and take them out. Now, what's unique about Tarawa is it is surrounded by coral reefs, and what that means is any traditional landing craft that America could use, like a Higgins boat, similar to what we used over in the European theater, would get hung up on these coral reefs, and the Japanese would be able to spray it with machine gun fire and artillery and mortars and kill absolutely everybody. The Japanese were so confident in these coral reefs and their fortified defenses that Admiral Shimasaki said that it would take 1,000,000 men 100 years to take Tarawa. But he didn't know that the Marine Corps had the LVT, the Landing Vehicle Tracked.
You don't know about Marines.
Tractor. Similar
Poor
to a
thing,
Higgins
you're about
boat,
to find
except
out.
It had tracks on it, and then when it hit the coral reefs, it would simply drive right over the top of them. So November 20th, 19...
Everyone's a gangster until the Marines show up. Everyone thinks they're hard until the Marines show up. Everyone thinks that they're savvy. Everyone thinks that they're fucking badass until the Marines show up. Yeah.
1943 at 3 a.m. under the cover of darkness, 18,000 Marines and one duck would load into their Salamander tractors as they prepared to launch their amphibious landing at the quack of dawn. As dawn broke, the Japanese soldiers watched in horror.
You can tell that I'm old too because I'm laughing at all these fucking dad jokes that he's making.
As the American landing crafts did not get hung up on the reefs, but simply drove right over the top of them. The only surviving Japanese officer from this battle, Kiyoshi Ota, would later go on to write, "We could see the American landing craft coming towards us like dozens of spiders over the surface of the water, as one of my men exclaimed, 'The gods of death have come.'" As the Marines reached the beach, they would become pinned down from heavy machine gun, artillery, and mortar fire. They were only able to secure the first 70 yards of the beach after hours of combat. It is at this point that the Marines' front line was charged by an enemy rooster, and Sergeant Seawash charged past the Marine line to meet the chicken in winged combat in the middle of the battlefield. After sustaining several pecks to the head, Seawash was able to repel the enemy ambush and save his fellow Marines. The Marines would then go on in the following days to completely take over the island. The Japanese believed that it would...
That's absolutely phenomenal. Like I said, I can't really tell you what I would have done if I was faced with the enemy. Like, imagine if the Taliban would have thrown a goat at me, and this goat had an attitude, and this goat had hands, and this goat could actually, you know what I'm saying? Like, at the end of the day, I'm just gonna mag dump his ass. But, however, a slight part of me would have had a little bit of an ego, and I may have quite possibly dropped my rifle and engaged in hand-to-hand, but that's great. It's absolutely great.
Men 100 years. In reality, it took 18,000 Marines and one Devil Duck 72 hours. For sustaining multiple peck wounds on the battlefield, the Marines tried to get Seawash the Purple Heart. Unfortunately, that wasn't going to work out, but the chain of command still cited Seawash for bravery on the battlefield.
Wait, was it the duck and the rooster that got into a tussle, or was it the sergeant? I have to go back and listen to that one more time. I thought that this man's actually got into a fight with a rooster. And hey, if you've never been in a fight with a rooster, it's not a fun experience. Them little fucking things are psychotic. I've been in plenty of fights with fucking roosters. I used to have chickens and guineas and chicks and roosters when I was younger. When I lived out in the middle of fucking nowhere, and this rooster had it out for me, bro. He didn't like me, and we would throw hands quite often. Sometimes I couldn't even leave the front door without a broom to protect myself.
Held the enemy ambush and save his fellow Marines. The Marines would then go on in the following days to completely take over the island. The Japanese believed that it would take 1,000,000 men 100 years. In reality, it took 18,000 Marines and one Devil Duck 72 hours. For sustaining multiple peck wounds on the battlefield, the Marines tried to...
I think it was the duck versus the rooster.
to get Seawash the Purple Heart. Unfortunately, that wasn't going to work out, but the chain of command still cited Seawash for bravery on the battlefield. That citation, written by Lieutenant Colonel Presley M. Brexley, is as follows. For courageous action and wounds received on Tarawa...
Okay, so it was... Okay, I heard it wrong. I'm sorry. My apologies. I heard it wrong. I thought that this man actually threw hands with this fucking rooster, but it was the duck that was throwing wings with the rooster. And the duck sustained some damage, but he didn't go down. That's because he's a marine duck, that's why.
Gilbert Islands, November 1943, with utter disregard for his own personal...
But still, I have to imagine that, man, someone throws an animal at you as a weapon, man, like, oof.
Safety. Seawash, upon reaching the beach without hesitation, engaged the enemy in fierce combat.
That's why I would never want to invade Florida, because those crazy fuckers will actually use alligators and crocodiles as weapons. And pythons. Like, nah, bro. I'm just trying to have a good old-fashioned shootout. I'm not trying to end up like fucking Steve Irwin. You know what I'm saying?
Namely, one rooster of Japanese ancestry, and though wounded on the head by repeated pecks, he soon routed his opposition. He then refused medical aid until all wounded members of his section had been taken care of first. Seawash and his fellow Marines would then see battle again at the Battle of Saipan, also known as the D-Day of the Pacific. However, allegedly due to some intel, there would be no enemy poultry on the beach, so Seawash's services were no longer needed, and he would remain on the boat for the initial 3 days of the battle. After that, he would go ashore and support his fellow Marines. At the conclusion of the Battle of Saipan, the Marines had gained valuable intel regarding the neighboring island of...
I think we've seen a video on the Battle of Saipan, but I can't remember if it was by the Fat Electrician or if it was by Yarn Hub or if it was by another one of these history channels that we watch, but we have seen a video on it. We have reviewed that.
Tinian, and they would immediately launch another attack to gain that island as well, and this time, the Devil Duck would partake in the amphibious landing. From there, he would identify an enemy duck that he would engage in build combat until forcing it to finally retreat. A couple of days after that, the Marines would take the island entirely, and shortly after that, Sergeant Seawash would lay an egg. Apparently, Seawash and the other duck I mentioned a minute ago were doing a little bit more than just fighting. Either way, at this point, the Marines now realize that Sergeant Seawash is in fact a girl, to which they're like,
a woman. Treacherous snake.
Kidding, they didn't actually care. In reality, they were probably giving each other a hard time, like, all right, who did it? Us up. Tania would be the last time that Sergeant Seawash ever saw combat. After World War II, she would end up getting sent back home to America with her fellow Marines and her primary caretaker, Francis Fagan. From there, the story of Sergeant Seawash picked up traction, being in Time magazine, having multiple radio appearances, being in a bunch of different newspapers, telling the harrowing story of America's one and only devil duck. And while all that's going on, she is partying her bill off with her Marines, drinking beer after beer, while also helping the Marines hit on young women. And I actually believe this to be the first historical appearance of the term wingman being used in relation to picking up women. Okay, I mean, look at this. Fagan and Seawash have more game than an Xbox. That man's about to
I mean, dude, yeah, look at that. If that's not a conversation starter, I don't know what is. What's going on, ladies? Meet my comrade over here. Yeah, we served together. He actually did see action, too. Caught himself a couple of fucking bodies as well. Ask him about it. He'll tell you. And that's fantastic.
Get more than an animal shelter. Over the next couple months, the publicity would die down and Francis Fagan would go on to become an electrician. And his great-grandson would also go on to become an electrician that had a pretty decent-sized YouTube channel. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not related to this guy. Anyways, Sergeant Seawash would also then go to live on a farm for an extended period of time until being called back into duty during the Korean War, where she helped with recruiting efforts. After that, she would finally retire to live out the rest of her days in the Lincoln Park Zoo in Chicago before passing away in 1953 due to liver complications, which prompted the Marines to release a statement saying that there is no reason to believe that her liver complications were due to her excessive amount of drinking during her time in service. According to multiple newspapers, her funeral service was then held in a taxidermy shop where she...
They straight up told the duck, your liver complication is not service related.
was then stuffed and currently resides in the National Museum of the Marine Corps in Triangle, Virginia. So in conclusion, this has been the totally real, 100% not embellished whatsoever story of Sergeant Seawash, aka America's Devil Duck. That time the Marine Corps won a duck in a poker game, taught it how to drink beer, then took it to multiple amphibious landings in the deadliest battles of World War II, kept it alive the entire time to bring it back home so they could use it to hit on women, and I think it is the most Marine Corps thing that has ever happened.
It
If
is.
I'm wrong, you can tell me down below, and if your story is better, I'll do a
It
video
is.
on that.
That's
Thank you for watching. Best way to support the channel is go by...
that's the most Marine Corps shit I've ever heard. Really. To be honest. Motherfuckers won a duck in a poker game, took it to war, the duck actually fought in battle, and then they brought it back as their fucking, not only was it their comrade, but it was also quite possibly their mascot at the time. And hell, if anything, they could have just used this duck for morale. You know how like people have service animals and shit? And they come back from the war and they're just like, "Hey, meet my duck. He's cute, isn't he? Now show me your titties."
some merch over at thefatelectrician.com. Quack bang out.
I bet you he loved saying that at the end of this video. Quack bang out. That's fantastic. The one video where quack bang out is actually, it actually fits so perfectly. Leave it up to the fucking Marines to, out of all animals, to take a duck into. And hey, you gotta give it to the duck too. That's a pretty disciplined duck, because at the end of the day, I feel like that's a wild animal, right? I mean, yeah, sure, you can domesticate them, but for the most part, they pretty much do their own thing. And from the ducks that I've seen in my life, yo, they don't give a fuck. They'll fuck you up. And they'll fuck with you. And if you catch an attitude with one of these, they will chase you. As long as they can. And as long as they have to. They don't care. You gotta give it to the duck too, really, to be honest. Motherfucker had some discipline. Had some good military bearing. Didn't leave his post. Stayed by his men. Stayed by his comrades. That's just... You love to see it, Cotton.